Will you pray with me? Gracious God, may the words of my mouth and the meditation of all of our hearts be acceptable to you, our rock and our Redeemer. Amen. When I ask you to picture a saint, what comes to mind? The answer might vary depending on your religious tradition. For those of us raised Catholic, saints figured prominently. Catholics are sort of known for their saints, and many of them come with fantastic legends and dramatic deaths. And as a child, I was both inspired and a little frightened. To become a saint in the Catholic Church, you have quite a few hurdles to clear. First of all, you have to be a Christian. Actually, you have to be a Catholic. Second of all, you have to have led an exemplary life of faith with no skeletons in your closet. And finally, you must be responsible for 2 post-mortem miracles, usually involving full, spontaneous healings with no medical intervention or explanation. Now, this whole process of canonization can take years, sometimes generations. To make it through, you have to have the patience of a saint. As a child, like I said, I was fascinated by their dramatic and sort of larger-than-life stories. They were sort of spiritual superheroes for us as children. But as I got older and my relationship to my faith became more nuanced, I really wasn't quite sure what to do with them. They seemed rather extreme and out of touch with human life as I knew it. And I was sharing this ambivalence one day with a friend of mine who was a priest, and he said something that opened my eyes. He said that for him, looking at the saints was sort of like looking at photos in a family album. Instead of being enshrined in stained glass or cast in marble, they give us a glimpse of where we come from and what we at our very best, our very human best, are capable of. Just like we might see ourselves in the small features of a distant relative, like Uncle Gene's nose or Aunt Marie's sense of humor, we too might find some family resemblances to those we consider saints. For when we sneak a peek behind the hagiography, we find people with personal weaknesses, with fears, tragic pasts, and complicated lives. But we also see people whose passions in life were aligned with God's passions. My favorite definition of a saint comes from Episcopal priest and scholar Barbara Brown Taylor, who reminds us that generally speaking, the saints were not distinguished by their goodness. They are distinguished by their extravagant love of God, which shines brighter than anything else about them. So what if we dropped the holy checklist of official sainthood, and we just focused on those extravagantly God-drenched folks and added them to our family album? What if we included people whose lives were marked by spiritual challenges, who chose to embrace their full spiritual potential despite their shortcomings, despite their limitations? And what if we included folks whose passions were not specifically religious, but still deeply reflected the glory of God? Could we call them saints? In the spirit of the still-speaking God, I think so. So this morning I thought we might take a little stroll through our own family album and meet some of the saints, likely and unlikely, that give us a glimpse behind the stained glass. Now this album is based on the work of Brother Robert Lentz, a Franciscan monk and artist, and his imagination opens up for us what it might be to live a holy life. Many of his images are considered heretical by the traditional church, but that's what can make them so provocative and faith-provoking for us. But first, let's begin the tour through our album with a couple of people that we may expect to find. And so we'll start with this fellow, Francis of Assisi. Now, Francis is one of the most well-known saints, and he's admired for his piety, his gentleness, his embrace of the poor. Yet Francis also defied his wealthy and powerful family as well as the Catholic Church by refusing to fight in the Crusades and by relinquishing all of his associations with his affluent family, including one dramatic moment where he stripped himself of all of his fine clothing and stood naked in front of them, literally turned his back on his family and the powerful church and walked into the woods to live a life of radical dependence and humility. Next, we have Hildegard of Bingen, the 12th century mystic whose intellectual gifts put her in the position of anchoress, that means the lead of an abbey, and she was an advisor to popes and to princes. From the time she was a child, she had visions of God in the divine feminine, and she shared those visions through her writings and her music. But because she was a woman who envisioned God in non-masculine ways, she often found herself at odds with the powers that be in Rome. Now, Hildegard became a saint not through the official process, but by popular acclaim. Next, we have a pair of saints that would certainly raise eyebrows in the contemporary church. For although they were martyred for their Christian beliefs and officially canonized, historical writings show that they were openly gay lovers. Saints Sergius and Bacchus were 4th century soldiers in the Roman army in Syria, and they refused to give up their Christian faith in order to worship the Roman gods. So they were persecuted and tortured and dressed up in women's clothing and dragged through the streets as an act of humiliation. Legend has it that Bacchus died first, and he appeared to Sergius to tell him that the rewards of heaven were greater than any suffering they experienced now, and that they would be reunited in heaven as lovers. As we move further through our family album, we encounter many folks who found that their passion for justice challenged the institutional church, but aligned them fully with God's priorities. Now, these folks have not been officially recognized as saints. One is in the process, but their holiness cannot be denied. People like Dorothy Day, the radical 1930s union organizer and anarchist, whose fierce advocacy for the poor and oppressed made her both beloved and notorious. The only way to live in any true security, she would point out, is to live so close to the bottom that when you fall, you do not have far to drop, and you do not have much to lose. "Don't call me a saint," she once said. "I don't want to be dismissed so easily." Likewise, Archbishop Oscar Romero defied the political arm of the church to stand against the brutal regime of the Salvadoran government in the 1980s. Now, Romero was a surprise in history. He was a pious and bookish priest, and he originally criticized the progressive liberation theology that so aligned with the poor farmers and gave them so much hope. And yet, when he saw thousands of his people being murdered by an oppressive government, as the church did nothing, he became radicalized. All Romero had to offer the people were weekly homilies broadcast throughout the country, his voice reassuring them not that the atrocities would cease, but that the church of the poor, they themselves, would live on. He said, "If someday they take away the radio station from us, if they don't let us speak, if they kill all the priests and the bishop too, each one of you must become God's microphone. Each one of you must become a prophet." He himself was assassinated by government forces while lifting up communion and saying Mass. Clearly, those whose lives are spent fighting for justice and human dignity have a special place in God's heart. Some were inspired directly by their faith, like the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., who found a sacred blueprint for the civil rights movement in the story of the liberation of the Hebrew slaves from Egypt and in the nonviolent resistance of Jesus. "Darkness cannot drive out darkness," he wrote. "Only light can do that. Hate cannot drive out hate. Only love can do that." Likewise, Hindu spiritual leader and human rights activist Mohandas Gandhi found his courage to resist the injustice of the British Empire through the teachings of Jesus. Others, like Mary Jones, whom a government official once called the most dangerous woman in America, are in this album because of their fearless defense of the working class. Now, Mary's faith played a more implicit than explicit role in her life. For 60 years, her faith drove her into the mining towns where men often feared to go, organizing unions and empowering the women left widowed by mining accidents. In the icon that you see here, she's depicted carrying a banner that says, "Pray for the dead and fight like hell for the living." And here is a saint that speaks to many of us in this community today, but would not likely make a list of Orthodox saints: Harvey Milk. Harvey Milk was the first openly gay person elected to high public office in the United States. He ran for city council in San Francisco because he felt that ordinary people were being pushed aside by moneyed interests. He fought consistently for the rights of all who didn't have a voice, who didn't have power. And on the day of his election, Harvey tape-recorded his last testament, in which he acknowledged that he would probably die violently. The last words of that message were, "You gotta give him hope. Hope will never be silent." On November 27th, 1978, he was shot 5 times at close range by another politician who was infuriated by his defense of gay and lesbian people. That night, 40,000 people, men and women, old and young, gay and straight, kept vigil outside of City Hall. And in this icon, Milk holds a candle, keeping vigil himself for the oppressed of the world. He wears a black armband with a pink triangle. This was a Nazi symbol for homosexuals, and it represents all those who have been tortured or killed because of cultural fears regarding human sexuality. Sadly, that number continues to grow with each passing year, and the compassionate Christ continues to say, "As long as you did it to one of the least of these, you did it to me." And finally, we have perhaps one of the most unlikely saints of all, Albert Einstein, the physicist. In an era where we often see science and faith pitted against each other, the recognition of Einstein as a saint bridges the sacred gap between the mysteries of God and the passion of the human mind to unlock them. It was not my rational consciousness that brought me to an understanding of the fundamental laws of the universe, Einstein said, but the beautiful experience of mystery. I want to know how God created this world. I am not interested in this or that phenomenon, in the spectrum of this or that element. I want to know God's thoughts. The rest are just details. In this day, in the life of the church, we honor the saints, people whose encounter with God shaped their lives and our world. And we honor those people whose lives were lived in quiet and courageous love, who were overlooked by the saint makers of the church. We remember those people who were saints to us, those flawed, complicated human beings who touched our lives with love and gave us a glimpse of God. On this day, we make a promise to them that their lives will not be mourned or forgotten, but celebrated. That the beauty, grace, and courage and compassion that they showed will become our passions as well. And so that we too may someday be among the unlikely saints ourselves, a new page added to God's family album. May it be so.